Hello, I'm Pedro Mora from the Pacific Coast of Canada, bringing you Pacific.ca. Socialism and capitalism are two economic ideologies struggling for supremacy. Ingo Schmidt, an instructor at Athabasca University, explores some of the little understood and often misunderstood perspectives of socialism and capitalism. Here is Ingo Schmidt.
Throughout my talk you will notice I'm kind of a social democrat by heart, meaning I wish it could work, but repeatedly I will talk about how it's not going to work and how we have to think beyond social democracy, and this is where the topic of socialism comes in. Having already identified myself as a socialist, next thing you expect me to do is mention the unity of theory and praxis. Obviously, I'm, at least today, mostly a talker, but I will remind people of the fact that there is some praxis unfolding, and this has to do with the t-shirt I'm wearing here today. You may wonder what this has to do with Occupy. Just about a year ago, slightly over a year, everybody was kind of excited on the left with this Occupy Wall Street movement. Nobody exactly knew what that was. Nobody knows at this point where it's going to go, whether it's going anywhere. But it has captured left imagination beyond anything that has happened in quite a long time. And Occupy Wall Street has become kind of a brand name. I was wondering about pulling a copyright on that to make some money. But then I had second thoughts and decided, why not talk about Occupy Socialism? And you may wonder why I switch from Wall Street to socialism. And you may be surprised by the answer that I give you. And the answer is, if you occupy Wall Street, what you will find there is socialism. Yes, believe it or not, they do have socialism on Wall Street. And if you don't believe me, because I'm just an old school socialist and Marxist, and they tell always funny stories that nobody believes in, you may believe in the spokespersons, people of the 1%. In February 2009, and that was when the crisis was really hitting hard on Wall Street, and also on payrolls, people losing their jobs as fast as stock markets came crashing down. So while all that was unfolding, Newsweek, speaking for the 1%, ran a story saying, "We are all socialists now." Yeah, Newsweek, February 2009, "We are all socialists now." And we all, that's not very many, it's just 1%. And if you still don't believe it, and if you're a modern person and have one of these tech things, you can check the internet and look for the article. It's not difficult to find it. And another way of seeing how that is true, what they said about themselves, that they are all socialists now, is just look at the banners the Occupy protesters were carrying around. They were all consistently denouncing socialism for the rich and capitalism for the poor. I think that's a pretty apt description of what was happening at the time, because all the money that was not available for schools, hospitals, kindergarten, you name it, it was available when the banker said, oh, sorry, there's still some money that I can't do it that way. Look, it's empty. Now, when bankers do that, of course, they wear different kinds of clothes than I do. If pinstripers say, "I'm out of money," the public purse is wide open. If other people do it, there is no public purse worth mentioning. The question that I had then, of course, was, well, if people denounce capitalism for the poor, why don't we talk about socialism for the poor? If they can have it, why can't we do away with them and have socialism for the 99%? Or probably it's just 90%. 9% might be the bastards who help the 1%. But there wasn't much of that at all. And that's what I found irritating. I was very excited, young protesters. As an aging radical, I thought somebody is carrying on the struggle. At the same time thinking, but they're not talking the left talk I want them to talk. And started asking myself, why is that? And I noticed what a change has happened over the last 30 to 40 years. The very old ones among you will remember, well, maybe also some younger ones, that in 1848, to German...
I remember it well.
I always knew you looked young, Jeff, right? There were these two then young German philosophers writing something which is fairly well known, and you can still get it and download for free on the internet. It's called the Communist Manifesto. And the opening phrase was, a specter is haunting Europe, and by Europe they meant the 1% ruling Europe at the time, the specter of communism. For a while it was really just an idea, a specter, but in the 20th century it became pretty real. This specter became a reality. There was communism, well, maybe not really communism, socialism, no matter how you call it, there was a real threat to the rule of capital. And into the 1970s, conservatives thought all we can do is slow down the process of socialism replacing capitalism. If you don't believe it, do some Googling again. Google Henry Kissinger. No doubt he was a die-hard conservative. He was anti-communist to the bone. But he thought we have to fight the people in Vietnam because they're the next stop for spreading socialism/communism around the world. And we have to stop them to slow the whole thing down, but we can't turn it around. Well, shortly thereafter, they did turn things around to the degree that we on the left who desperately want socialism get quite nervous if anybody asks us what that actually is, how we could get there, and what we would do if we were in power. If Stephen Harper kind of would give us the key and say, we are all in retreat now, do with this economy as you please. It would be difficult. And starting to ask these questions, I started also understanding why these young Occupy activists weren't too keen on picking up the issue of socialism. So I asked myself, why would they talk about socialism? Why do we need socialism in the first place? But I stick to my politics and say, we need socialism, and I will end this talk by giving you some ideas how, in my view, we might be able not to build it tomorrow, but start having a debate again that can hopefully, together with some praxis, lead us back onto the road of building a strong socialist movement that not only talks, but is also able to push for something to revive the spectra that then will hopefully haunt the 1%. Now, before I come to a conclusion, I have to present something, obviously, to conclude from then. And that is, why do we need socialism? Well, for some of you, that might be a pretty boring question, because the answer is so simple and straightforward. And the answer is, shortly, because capitalism failed over and over again. Not so much in terms of the 1%, as I just noted, when they have empty pockets, they get plenty of public money to help them over their calamities. The important thing about capitalism is that it promises happiness, the pursuit of happiness. A neighboring country has written that down in its constitution, pursuit of happiness. And capitalism promises the pursuit of happiness not only for the 1%, but for everybody, sooner or later. It trickles down, you work hard, but one day, sooner or later, it comes. And what I am saying is, happiness only comes for the happy few, but not for the struggling 99%. And I made up a list of failed capitalisms to reinforce my point, how it always fails for the 99 or 90% of the world's population. about 100 years ago, when socialism was kind of going strong, or the socialists thought it was going strong, capitalism was also going strong, and it had many national colors. There were Canadian workers and American, there was Canadian capitalism, well, not so much Canadian, but British capitalism, and American and German. And the promise of that capitalism was to the 99%, to the workers, if you wave the national flag, you'll be better off. And didn't quite work out that way. People ended up in the trenches. Workers ended up in the trenches, slaughtering each other in World War I. And then came the horrors of World War II, just naming Auschwitz, Stalingrad, Hiroshima, and Dresden. Capitalism working for workers waving national flags? I don't think so. It didn't work out that way. After that failure, capitalists thought we have to kind of present ourselves more friendly, also to ward off these socialist threat going around. Then came welfare capitalism. Welfare capitalism was much nicer. All of a sudden, social democrats were invited into government instead of being outlawed or even ending up in concentration camps. Unions were recognized. There was a bargaining table. That was great. Real advances were made, but not for everybody. For some segments of the working class, let's say for 20%, but not for the 90%. If you were of the wrong color, the wrong gender, the wrong belief system, didn't have a passport, were an immigrant, chances were that you were not part of welfare capitalism, that there was no bargain for you. So on that score, there was a failure. And of course, if you came from the South, things were entirely different, even though in the South they were promising development. New capitalists in the post-colonial states promised development to the developing working classes in those countries, saying, if you build lots of factories, you will have it better one day. It will trickle down. Yes, and it did trickle down, because now the South has all these sweatshops where workers are toiling away to deliver cheap consumer goods to northern markets where workers can't buy anything but cheap goods because their wages are depressed. Now that's another failure and leads us right into global capitalism, which promised something which has never been promised before, because some of you might have heard about the mastermind of conservative economic policies, Milton Friedman, who famously said there is no free lunch, meaning when a social democrat came around and was asking for kindergarten and public health care, these guys would say, sorry, there's no free lunch, it's too expensive, we can't pay for that. Comes global capitalism, comes Steve Jobs and Bill Gates and the computer revolution and unregulated capital, free movement of capital around the world, and stock markets exploding. Supposedly comes a free lunch. Only idiots keep on working. Smart ones just invest on the stock market and everything is doing well. And it was very well. This is where the 1% kind of gained the strength that they then took into the bailout just a few years later. For the workers, it didn't work out well in the first place, because to prop up stock markets, companies always had to show that they were very capable of screwing workers, and companies were capable of doing that. Stock markets come down. Global capitalism, as it was perceived in the 1990s, did not fly, and we see the results of that still. Shouldn't forget something that socialists have forgotten all too often in the past, which capitalism put on its agenda, and that is saving Mother Earth. Capitalism went so far, or its spokespeople went so far to suggest we can save Mother Earth if there's only a free market, if we chop up Mother Earth into bits and pieces and make her something sellable, something for which there is a market, then Mother Earth will be fine. That was the promise. And if you look at the reality, people are pushed off their lands. First Nations people, you just look around the province of British Columbia to get one example among many others. access to resources elsewhere, you instigate civil wars. You might take a look at Nigeria or to Libya, and if you are good in geography, you will find many other examples, or outright wars and occupations. You look to Iraq, and might also find some other examples. Saving Mother Earth is actually just a code word for resource wars without end. Now, this is a great socialist rant that you're listening to. Congratulations. And this is what socialists have been doing all along.
On this first segment, Ingo Schmidt differentiates nationalist socialism from global socialism. He also links welfare capitalism and welfare socialism. And finally, he warns us of the futility of green capitalism.